to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, good evening, everybody. Welcome to our March action meeting. I want to remind everybody that we are live casting the meeting this evening. Mrs. Sugars, would you take roll, please?
Mr. Goodwin?
Here.
Mrs. Judge?
Here.
Mrs. Matlack?
Here.
Mrs. Seidel?
Here.
Mrs. Scarpolino?
Here.
Mrs. Schultz?
Here.
Mr. Tomlinson?
Here.
Dr. Wong?
Here.
Still have our public hearing at our April 24th board meeting. That's the next step in this process. After this is approved tonight, we will submit it to the county office, and then the county office will give us the yes or no. And once that happens, then we will come back and we will have the public hearing and we will go through a voting process again. So this is the first step in that. So let's talk about some of the highlights in our budget this year. Some of the additional things that we are adding to the budget is an additional world language teacher at the middle school, a Chinese language program at the high schools, B teams at the middle schools, and 5 additional full-time campus police officers are included in this budget. We often summarize our budgets in some very broad categories. If we take a look at our general fund for this year, and we break it down into salaries, benefits, and other, salaries and benefits tend to be 75 to 80% of our budget, and that leaves other for everything else. So what does that mean? That means we have tuition to other districts and out-of-district placements. That means we have utilities and transportation. And all those different kinds of things, supplies for the classrooms, all those kind of good things come out of that other category. Salaries and benefits make up the rest of that. So as you can see here, for our general fund this year, our budget is just about $4.5 million more than it was last year, about 2.3% increase in the budget for this year. So if we, again, take our budget and we break it down another way and we look at kind of the educational costs, and then we have support costs. So if we take a look first at our educational costs, now these are costs that are attributable to a specific program, a specific grade level. And so our first category is regular education. That's increasing just over $2 million. Special education, $269,000. Basic skills is going down a little bit. That's really more of a reallocation of staff that's causing that decrease, not a decrease in the program. We have extracurricular and athletics, and the increase you see there is the B teams that I spoke about. Other instructional programs is part of our summer program. Overall, our educational costs are increasing $2.2 million, about 2.7%. We flip that over and we look at our support costs. Support costs would include our out-of-district tuition, student services, which would be our guidance office, our child study team office, our attendance office, media and instruction, our media offices, and our professional development, curriculum development. Administration, as the state defines it, is our business office, our superintendent's office, our principal's offices, our technology office. Facilities and security is all of our grounds, facilities, maintenance, security, office personnel. Transportation is transportation, and then employee benefits. So if we look at all those different categories, we add that up, you can see that the driving force in this category is our benefits increase, $3.7 million, about 9.5%. And our out-of-district tuition is the next highest cost in that category. So overall, a $4.4 million increase in those categories, about 4.1%. Finally, if we kind of round out our general fund, we look at our capital outlay. That's where we do our projects and buy equipment and things of that nature. This year, we will spend a little bit less in our capital reserve. We'll talk about some of the projects that we're going to do in our capital reserve this year. We have a little bit less that we're spending this year. It's been a very busy year, as you know, as we've been preparing for referendum. So we felt that taking on too many projects this year was just going to overtax all of us, and John Middleton would probably run screaming from my office. So we decided to back off on that a little bit. The 3 projects that we have slated out of that $2 million, the capital reserve funds. The first category would be security vestibules. Now, as you know, we've talked a lot about security vestibules and security measures such as cameras and swipe card access and things of that nature coming out of our referendum. But what we decided to do to try to get that process moving was to pick 2 schools, that would be Woodcrest and Payne, where we would start to do the vestibules this year. And we chose those 2 schools because it's a fairly simple process to put vestibules in those buildings. If you're familiar with them, you know that the main offices are right near the front entrances. So it wouldn't be new construction, it wouldn't be a lot of reconfiguration of offices to do those 2 buildings. So we picked those 2 buildings to try to get that ball rolling. We can, again, as we did with Barkley, install those things, see how they work, take a look at it, and then implement that in our other buildings, you know, if we have a successful referendum. So that's one of the projects we're planning. That'll be a little over $1 million. The other project is some structural wall issues that we have at East that need to be addressed. And more recently, we found out we have a roof issue all over the auditorium at East. So we will address that as well. So that'll round out, you know, our $2 million in projects for next year. So overall, a total budget, again, just over $200 million, a $4.4 million increase, about 2.3% overall. So if we look at that graphically, you can see kind of just those broad categories that we spoke about, what makes up our budget. You can see some of the larger categories: regular education, special education, student services, which I just mentioned, employee benefits, take up some of the larger pieces of our budget. We flip it over and we look at revenues. If we start with our non-state aid revenues and talk about that first, our tax increase is at the 2% cap. Tuition, miscellaneous revenues, federal aid, not much changes there. Fund balance, we are using some additional fund balance this year. When we closed out our budget at the end of June last year, we had some what we call excess surplus. We are allowed to maintain a fund balance of 2% of the prior year expenditures. We allowed some of that to lapse into excess surplus, which meant we would have to use it in this budget year for 2 reasons. One, you know, we knew that you know, we wanted to be prepared in case we needed it, and 2, we weren't sure we were going to be eligible for a spending growth limitation adjustment. Traditionally, in the past couple years, we've been eligible for an adjustment to our cap, our tax cap, because of our health benefit costs. Last year, we got out of the state plan. We went to a cheaper plan. We weren't sure if we were going to be eligible for that or not. So we kind of put that excess surplus in our back pocket to have it in case we needed it, and so we're going to use that this year. So we do see a significant increase in that fund balance number. And overall, all of our non-state aid revenues, about $184 million, increasing by 3.8%. The bulk of that increase is in our taxes and fund balance, and that's about 2.1%. Now, if we flip it on the other side and we look at our state aid, we received about $596,000 of general fund state aid more this year than we did last year. You will recall that last summer, we sort of got a little surprise in July when we got an additional $1 million in state aid. And so this year we got an additional $596,000. We were obviously hoping for more. We're always hoping for more, but we're moving in the right direction, so that's good news. So the main category that increased this year was transportation aid. All the other categories pretty much stayed the same. Some of the categories of aid that we saw last year, the park readiness aid, the per pupil growth aid, the professional learning aid, kind of went away. So we didn't see those as categories of aid this year. And then the extraordinary aid, as you know, we always budget conservatively with that because that's a process that takes place after our budget is done. So for instance, our extraordinary aid for the 2017-18 year budget, we haven't even applied for yet. Typically that application comes out in May. So we usually budget, you know, rather conservatively because we don't always feel that we can count on that. It's actually an aid in, it's a state appropriation in their budget for next year. So we try to be careful with that one. So we kept that at the $800,000. So as you can see, 4% increase over last year, $596,000 increase in state aid. And again, if we look at that graphically, you can see that the bulk of our revenues are tax levy. If you add our fund balance, our capital reserve, and our tax levy, you come up with about 91% there. That's how much we're funding of our own budget. And then the other categories, state aid, federal aid, miscellaneous revenues are some of our smaller categories of aid. So there's two other funds that you'll vote on tonight when you see the resolution. The Special Revenue Fund is how we account for our grants. We are required to budget 85% of the prior year. Our budget process and our grant allocation process does not coincide, so we don't know what we're going to get for our grants. But typically, IDEA funds, which is the bulk of our funds, we use for out-of-district tuition. And then the title funds we use for a variety of things, professional development, things like that, some teacher salaries. And then our other grant funds, we have some non-public funds that flow through there. We have some local grants that flow through there. So although it looks like a decrease, may not necessarily be. We just, like I said, we budget 85% of what we got the year before now until we know exactly what our allocations will be. And then our debt service, you can see here that our debt service goes up slightly this year, just under $90,000. We did receive $25,000 more in debt service aid from the state. We went from $115 million or $1,015,000 to $1,040,000, so we did see a little bit of an increase there. And as you know, because we're going to talk about project applications and referendum a little bit tonight, this is our last year of debt. So after this year, you know, this is the last payment that we'll make on that bond issue. So that makes it a really good time for us to look at referendum. So this is the resolution you'll see on the agenda tonight, the total budgets, and then the tax levy that supports each of those budgets. And this is the tax impact. Fund 10 will be kept at the 2% cap. Fund 40 goes up slightly, just about $63,000. Overall, the increase is 2.01%. On the average assessed home of $224,000, it's about $82. Are there any questions? Okay, so again, as I said, this is the first step in the process. We will submit this to the county office tomorrow, and then we will wait for their approval, and you will hopefully see the same budget again on April 24th. Okay.
Thank you. Any questions about the budget?
You are welcome.
Had a bit of time to chew on it. Dr. Wong.
I have a question about the equipment and the construction, and we propose much less than last 2 years, and so that's because we are asking for the referendum, or we have other reasons.
That's part of it. We'll not do as many projects as we normally do this year. Some of that too is when you see the higher number for 17, 18, a lot of times those are funds that carry from year to year, because a lot of times we don't complete the projects in the budget year. So some of those funds that came into 17, 18 will probably carry over from last year, and you may see some of that carry over into next year. So it's really just kind of how the funds move with the projects. We don't always complete those projects within the budget year, so you may see that number increase as the budget year goes on.
I know I've heard it before, but could you explain why the Title II funds have disappeared?
Why they have disappeared?
The reason why they've disappeared, not the...
Well, I believe, part of it is federal funding. Federal funding changes all the time, right? You get a new administration in, and they kind of decide how they want to allocate the funds and how they're going to use them. We've traditionally used it mostly for professional development. And we'll still see some, but I believe, and Farah, jump in here if you need to. There's a new form of aid, a Title IV that we will see, which is is that drug-free? No, not anymore. So, you know, from year to year, and changes in administration, sometimes we see different kinds of grant funds coming from the federal government.
That's absolutely correct. Title II funds are typically used for professional development, and we hope that there is not a significant decrease in those funds because we rely on them heavily to offer professional development to our staff. And Title IV funds are actually shared between my office and Mrs. Wethington's office in that it's supposed to be designated for science, technology, engineering, and math programs. It can be for mental health programs. It can be for drug and alcohol. There are several different things that fall under Title IV. So we will be receiving those funds as well.
Anything else for Mrs. Sugars? No? Well, thank you very much, Mrs. Sugars. That was a wonderful presentation. All right, so we'll move into our correspondence. I know we have a few members that have correspondence for us. Would you like to go first, Mrs. Judge?
So I had a few things to report tonight, a few things regarding Garden State, but I'm doing it kind of in chronological order of when they occurred or when they will occur. So on March 8th, because I'm on the executive board of Garden State Coalition of Schools, I was invited to meet with our Assemblywoman Pam Lampett, along with the executive director of Garden State, Betsy Ginsburg, and president of Garden State, Jordan Schiff. But due to the weather, we had a phone conference instead. Just as an aside, Betsy lives in Glen Ridge, and this was supposed to be a 10 o'clock meeting, and she figured she was going to have to, it was snow, snow. She was going to have to leave at 6:15 to get here because it was at least 2 hours away. And so anyway, so it was at about 10 o'clock at night, she got the word that it was going to be a conference call instead of an actual in-person meeting. So anyway, so Assemblywoman Lampett graciously gave us an hour of her time, and Betsy Ginsburg touched on what Garden State Coalition of Schools is and what we're all about and our members, etc. And we brought up a few points throughout the hour that she gave us regarding recommending legislation to allow school security costs and mental health costs outside the 2% cap that public schools are limited to. I was able to bring up a couple of issues specific to Cherry Hill, such as regarding replacing Park, which we're hearing is going to happen, taking actual practitioner opinions when replacing Park, taking opinions from the field, reining in tuition costs for private special education schools, and the rising costs of McKinney-Vento students. And hopefully that you had a moment to contact her because she had a question regarding McKinney-Vento that I could not answer. So I know it's shocking, but I was not able to answer her question. So thank you. Thank you for that. So the other couple of things I wanted to report out was the East Assembly on March 13th. I was able to attend the East Student Government sponsored security assembly presented by Mr. John Hunt from AtlantiCare, along with several therapy dogs and his other staff that he had. Mrs. Matlack attended the earlier session that included the 11th and 12th graders, and I attended the later session for the 9th and 10th graders. It was a very real discussion, video presentation on a very real and current topic, especially since we just had the March for Our Lives march this past Saturday. And I was able to stay for the entire assembly and talk to Mr. Hunt after all the kids had their time with the therapy dogs. It was really fun to watch and talking to Mr. Hunt also. I am attending the DECA lunch tomorrow at noon or 11:45 with Mrs. Matlack is also attending. The next Garden State meeting is tomorrow afternoon, so I'm leaving Lamberti's around 1 to go to East Brunswick. The guest speaker for tomorrow's Garden State meeting is Cynthia Rice. She's the senior policy analyst for an organization called Advocates for Children of New Jersey. A couple of us are going to the Unsung Hero reception at West this Thursday morning. And due to the reason that my relationship with Garden State Coalition of Schools and that I'm on the executive board, I've been invited to attend a meeting with Garden State and Assemblyman Lou Greenwald on April 5th, next Thursday, to discuss HIB. And I think it was because of the meeting we had here in February that Lou has invited the executive board. We're meeting him up in Trenton to discuss HIB consequences and unintended consequences. And we spoke, I was able to spend 20 minutes or so with Dr. Malash and Mrs. Withington earlier today to get the school, we would know as board members regarding HIB, but I wanted to hear administrative opinion regarding the consequences and unintended consequences. So the last thing I wanted to report is the budget testimony hearings that are coming up. Several of us are scheduled to testify at both the Senate Assembly hearing on the budget at Rowan University. I think at least myself, Mrs. Matlack, Mrs. Seidel, Mrs. Scarpolino. I know others are planning to hand in testimony. Because we signed up as a member of the board, we are given 5 minutes total as a group. Any group at the testimony at these functions, we're only given 5 minutes. So we have to figure out after this meeting how we're going to work that. And when I did speak to Stephanie at the legislation person, I said I wasn't happy with that at all, but that's how they're organizing it. So and then I'm also scheduled to so that's for the Senate at Rowan University. The Assembly hearing on the budget is in Trenton on April 9th, and I'm also signed up to that along with Mrs. Scarpolino. And I don't know if anybody else is going, but the two of us are going up at least. And it's like, hand in your testimony. And if you want me to read yours, I'd be happy to do so. So, because I know you're not able to attend. So that's my report. Any questions? Back to you, Dr. Dickinson. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Judge. Busy time. Mrs. Matlack has something to share with us.
A couple of short things. I went over to West on March 14th for their walkout, and I got the opportunity to speak to some of the kids and to walk with them for a little bit. So that was a great experience, and the kids were, very involved and very articulate. Excuse me. Articulate about why they were doing it. And I had the opportunity to speak to a couple of the young women from the broadcasting department, and they asked what I thought of it, and I told them that I was proud of them for using positive action to express their voice and their opinion. So that was a good experience. Thank you. And then the New Jersey School Boards Association, Camden County branch, it was having their 8th grade dialogue, which got snowed out. That's an event that they have every year. So it's been rescheduled for April 18th. So if anybody has not registered and wants to go to that, you can re-register for that. And Mrs. Judge mentioned about the Unsung Heroes at West. I'm looking forward to going to that. And I attend, as the board representative, the DEAC meetings and cultural proficiency. I won't be able to attend the April meetings. So if there's any board member who can attend in my place, if any board member can attend in my place, I'd appreciate that. For the DEAC meeting, I believe it is let me check. Cultural proficiency is the 12th of April, and the DEAC meeting is the 13th of April.
They during the day?
Yes, they are. They are in the morning. 9:30 for the cultural proficiency, and I believe 8:30 for the DEAC meeting. So if anybody can attend for me, just let me know so I can let the administrators know about that. That's all I have. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Any other correspondence? No? Okay, seeing none, we'll move into our board rep reports. I guess we'll start off with West.
Good evening.
evening, Dr. Malash, Dr. Dickinson, Mr. Goodwin, and esteemed members of the board. As usual, West activities and athletics have continued to dominate the month of March. Starting off the month, West's music department hosted their annual Broadway night show on March 2nd and 1st. Their performances centered on the theme of musicals, creating a lively, uplifting, and thoroughly entertaining show for all those who attended. And despite the several winter storms throughout the month, spring athletics are in full swing. From volleyball to track to lacrosse, West athletes are putting in the work no matter the weather conditions outside. And we are all looking forward to see what happens in the upcoming season. And the sophomore class of 2020 celebrated the yearly cotillion at the Pennsauken Country Club on Saturday, March 3rd. From what I have been told, the night was filled with lots of fun. On a more serious note, as Mrs. Matlack has mentioned, hundreds of West students joined over 300,000 other schools in the nationwide walkout on March 14th. Those who wished to participate engaged in a 17-minute walk around the track to commemorate the 17 lives tragically lost last month at Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School. Participants also listened to speeches from their peers and watched several subject-appropriate videos. Personally, I found the day to be very impactful and empowering, and I wanted to thank the administration and teachers for allowing the students to share their voice safely and respectfully. But without a doubt, the theater department stole the spotlight as they performed this year's spring musical, The Phantom of the Opera. Opening night was held on March 16th and production concluded this past Saturday. The play tells a story of a haunting in the Grand Paris Opera House. The theater department added life, romance, and character to the classic novel and musical the world has come to know and love. The show was one to remember and clearly depicts the talented students we have here at West. Spring break is quickly approaching, along with the end-of-year activities. The junior spring formal will take place the Thursday we return from break at the Collingswood Ballroom. And lastly, seniors are preparing for the annual trip to Disney World, which begins on April 17th. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your report. Next up, we'll have East.
Hello, esteemed members of the board. It's good to see you again. Although it has only been 1 month since my last report, I have quite a bit to talk about, so I'll try to keep this brief. At the last meeting, I noted the upcoming spring musical, The Music Man. I'm pleased to report that many members of our community came out during the showings early in the month and that the production itself went as planned. With the ambition demonstrated in the production of the show, including the live music provided by the pit orchestra and the inclusion of children and a horse, and the success that followed, it's obvious our theater department will only continue to produce better and more enthralling performances than before. You can look forward to more from our drama department with the upcoming one-act plays. Students come together to write, cast, and direct their own plays as part of the final major theater activity of the year. East also held its spring blood drive on March 13th and 14th. Our blood drive organization has consistently held one of the largest blood drives in the South Jersey area, and this year was no exception. Students who meet the age, weight, and health restrictions gave varying amounts of blood, which goes towards local reserves used for transfusions. The organization also secured donations of food from popular local eateries to give to students who donated. Although students are primarily motivated to donate by want to help give life to others, few will deny that receiving high-quality baked goods after is a perk. In light of the mass shooting at Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School and discontent among the student body, a number of groups organized events during the week of the 12th in order to discuss gun ownership, school shootings, and our own concerns. The ethics and political discussion clubs each held special meetings during the lunch breaks early in the week in order to engage students unaffiliated with their organizations in meaningful discussion about the morality and policy related to this issue. A group of students, including our outgoing student body president, Maddie Levin, organized a set of assemblies with John Hunt, the corporate director of security for AtlantiCare, and an expert in school shooter situations, in order to have a serious discussion on how to handle an active shooter situation. Katie Crona, a former Columbine student and current recruiter for Facebook, was also brought in to talk about her experiences during the shooting there. Although it was the first time she had publicly spoken about her experiences, it was a moving speech. A walkout was also organized for March 14th, during which students walked around the outside of the school for 17 minutes, 1 minute for each of the students lost at Stoneman Douglas. Student government organized a wall of paper feet on which students could write a short sentence about why they were walking. A voter registration drive also was held. I and many of the other students are thankful for the steps taken by the school and our peers to address this issue and bring everyone together to find common ground. Spring sports, just like the temperature, are starting to warm up. Although none of the teams have begun their seasons just yet, many are engaged in practices and scrimmages. You can look forward to more on their success this season in next month's report. Most recently, approximately 300 seniors went to Orlando on the school senior trip. Students, including myself, spent 4 days in the Disney parks and 1 day in Universal before flying back late last night. I personally really enjoyed the 80-degree weather and eating Mickey waffles every day. Despite some delays with the flight back home for some of the students, it was a wonderful time and I'll surely remember it for quite a while. Another event of note is the beginning of this year's student government election cycle. We recently voted on our school-wide SGA officers. Lucas Seaman will act as East Student Body President through the end of this school year into the next, with the help of the 4 school-wide vice presidents. The elections for class officers and representatives will be beginning soon. In addition, the process for selecting the new Board of Education representative has also begun. The information meeting occurred about a week ago. Although Josh and I will be sad to leave you, we think that the next set of representatives will do a fine job. We have several events coming up in the near future. On Thursday, our annual Multicultural Day will occur. Members of our wide variety of cultural organizations will demonstrate the most interesting aspects of their heritage through booths, activities, and an organized dance. Members of these clubs work for months to get everything together, and we know it will be a day to remember. Right after spring break on April 13th, we will have our annual Mr. East competition. 10 boys from the senior class, including our own Josh Sadikoff, will demonstrate their talents, ability to dance, and taste in formal wear in order to vie for the coveted title of Mr. East. It's always a fun night, and you should come out. Next week, all of the schools are out for spring break. Although we appreciate all of the work that the teachers, staff, and administrators do for us, we're very happy to have a break. If you have any questions, feel free to ask them now.
Any questions? Thank you both for your reports. Very, very good. Very good. Thank you. All right, so we'll have our first public discussion comment period. At this time, your comments must be regarding items on the action agenda. When you come to the mic, please state your name and address and the number of the item to which you will be speaking. You'll have 3 minutes for your remarks. Please note that the green light will turn yellow when you have 30 seconds remaining. The light will turn red when your 3 minutes are up. Anybody for anything on the agenda? Okay.
Is this on? There we go. Miriam Stern, 121 Ashford Road. And just regarding the proposed budget for next year and the bond which was mentioned, I just wanted to mention the fact that last night at the town council meeting, Councilman Fleischer stated that he is in support of the township joining in a lawsuit to sue the state because of the low funding we, again, were apparently going to receive in that the governor put out in his budget. And there's a lot of discussion in the community about the need for Cherry Hill, the school district and the government and the parents to join in and support and do every possible thing we can to get the money that we've been shorted for a long time, 10 years, as you all know. And I'm just asking that the board and the administration support this effort that the community has definitely, and I'm sure you all know, is there are a lot of members of the community who think that that's the right action step given the very small increase we got so far that's been offered, I guess, as in the governor's budget. So asking that really be considered. I know that some of the discussions that I've heard is that it's not under consideration from the administration and the board's perspective, but I think that things are different, things have changed, and I think to ask the community to spend more money towards our schools when we've been shorted for so long may not be the best approach and the best strategy. So, thank you.
Thank you.
And Einhorn, 1017 Edgemore Road. I always have deja vu when I'm here. I have a question, Mrs. Judge, about the comments. The Senate is giving you 5 minutes as a group. Do we know how much time the Assembly is giving you?
Not yet. Several board members, if you don't mind, several board members signed up. Like I signed up on Monday, I believe, and a couple of members signed up on Tuesday, and we started getting phone calls quickly thereafter saying that because we signed up as a group, we're representing Cherry Hill as board members, that groups were only going to be given 5 minutes.
So we do have board members actively trying to help the situation.
Absolutely.
Is my understanding. My concern with all that is how interested are they if they're only giving you 5 minutes? And after this young lady whose name Miriam escapes me, I'm more than willing to support a bond, even though I haven't had children in schools in over 10 years. I'm also willing to support the budget. I've been there and done that. Okay, and we need the money, okay, from the budget alone. But I wonder how interested the Senate and Assembly are if they're only allowing you 5 minutes, and that disturbs me greatly. Of late, there's been a lot of politicians pontificating in the public about what we're going to do, but on the main structural level, if you're only getting 5 minutes, I wish you well, and I wish our community well. But thank you for going and
Mrs.
trying
Einhorn.
and trying.
Some of us went last year. Some of us went last year to both the Senate down in Kingsway and the Assembly, which was at Sicklerville, CCTI. And I don't recall the limit. I know that maybe it was 3 or 4 minutes. I don't recall it being specified. But I have not heard from the Assembly. Have you heard from the Assembly yet? Is it 5 minutes? Even at the Assembly?
Yeah, I got a phone call because I think I signed up after you, and I was told because we're from the same organization that we're going to be limited to 5 minutes.
Then it's very sad to me as a resident of Cherry Hill that for a 30-year deficit, because it's not just the last 10 years, okay, that we get 10 minutes. So, but thank you for trying.
Good evening. My name's Rick Short, 1002 Chelton Parkway. I'm talking about Section B under the vestibules for Payne and Woodcrest. Yet again, the school administration and school board totally amazes me. I don't know whether to call you guys Keystone Cops or what, but I believe you have no idea what you're doing. Exhibit A is the cameras, and this is unconfirmed, but I will get it confirmed. The cameras that you have at Barclay are supposedly Chinese brand, cheap, hackable cameras. But I don't know if that's a true fact, but I will find out and do Oprah's. Second thing, last week, and this is also unconfirmed, we had a student walk out of Thomas Paine, unconfirmed, a kindergartner, just walk out the front door, and nobody saw this happen. Again, this is unconfirmed. Third thing, you have an expert come in, John Hunt, who is actually an Alice pro, and I talk about the deadly 8-ball all the time. He's actually like my type of trainer, so you guys bring in an outside expert that trains something totally opposite of what your current protocols are. It's a complete joke. And then again, I remind you, on January 23rd, I came in front of all you and I gave you different scenarios. So right now, you're going to go out and spend $1 million on 2 vestibules when you could spend about 1.2 or 1.3 million and have over 650 to 700 live feed cameras of every school. No. So what's protected now? We have 16 schools protected after this $1 million that you spend. I do not understand why this board and this administration never wants to put live feed cameras to everything. You know, I can think of 100 different scenarios where a child could just walk out and there would be no, even with the 50% of police, you're really making a mistake. And again, I have about 45 seconds left, and I will say it again. Please vote no on this bond and cover 650 to 700 cameras through every school this year so September 1st comes. Again, please vote no and have cameras in 650 to 700 cameras this year. Don't vote yes. Don't spend $1 million on something that's going to help just 2 schools. Help all 19 schools. Again, vote no.
Thank you. Anybody else? No. Okay. Seeing none, I'll turn the microphone over to Dr. Malash.
Thank you, Dr. Dickinson. So as we sit March 27th, spring break is next week. Thank you, ladies, for your reports on what's going on in the high schools. It's, again, incredibly quick and how quickly the school year is going to come to a rapid close. I am grateful for the student reps that we have each year, the young ladies and their counterparts, when the information that they share to help to round out the experience that you as board members and the community gets to see and gets to hear about what goes on. I did have the good fortune to attend the Music Man and Phantom of the Opera, and they are correct. Incredible, incredible shows. If you did not get a chance to go out and see them, please make sure you mark your calendars next year to see the shows. Go and see the shows that are being done, the One Act Play Festival at both of the high schools that comes up this spring. All 3 middle schools are doing shows right now. I encourage you to go out and see them. The talent that we have within our district, what the children are able to do, the shows that are produced, absolutely incredible. So please make sure you follow up. Make sure you see what's going on. If it's your children in one of the schools, or if it's just using the district website or the district app to find out what's taking place, please make sure you get out and support the events and support the kids. It has been incredibly busy since our last board meeting. March ends up being a short month for us in a lot of ways, but an incredible number of activities that have gone on in the schools. And the kids talked about, and Mrs. Matlack and Mrs. Judge, you guys talked about some of the activities that have gone on and related to the student walks on March 14th and the activities that took place. I'm incredibly proud of the students, right? So I spent a lot of time talking about student voice within our schools, within our district, something I'm an incredible proponent of. That we talk to the students and ask them what they think, and then we ask them what their ideas are, and that we as the adults within the school district help to guide them and help to funnel their thoughts and their perspectives in terms of what goes on. There's been a lot of discussion, not just in Cherry Hill, but nationally, about violence and about gun violence and about what takes place in our schools. I'm incredibly proud of the students. There were some intense discussions that have taken place within the hallways and within the buildings within our schools about what it means to be safe, about gun ownership, and about a lot of things that the kids are concerned about. I had the opportunity as well to be over at High School West as the kids finished up the walk, the ones that participated down at the stadium and came walking back up. And an incredible sight, to stand there behind the auditorium at West and watch hundreds and hundreds of students and staff members and some other folks come walking up and talk about what the experience was, just to see that visual. I had a chance to be over at High School East, and to stand literally in the driveway out on Crescent Road and watch as hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of students circled that building, listen to the conversations as they went by, and some in silence, and some that carried signs, but to hear about what their perspective is. One of the biggest challenges that we have, especially in terms of supporting students, is truly listening to the students and supporting them in what they feel they need. Right, which is incredibly challenging. As adults, we all have perspectives on what we believe is important and how we believe things done or should be done. The kids don't always share those perspectives, right? But I'm incredibly grateful that they took the time in each one of the high schools and honestly at the 3 middle schools, because there were activities that occurred at all 3 middle schools. And they did not look the same at each of the secondary schools. The alternative high school as well did something. They did not look the same. But it met the needs of the kids within that school as they talked with the administrators and they talked with the teachers about what took place. And that's so incredibly important for us to remember, for you all as board members to remember, that we are here to meet the needs of the children and to help to guide the children. That is not always necessarily the popular thing or what folks that are outside talk about, right? But it's about us meeting the needs of the kids. So I'm incredibly grateful, ladies, if you'll take that back to the kids within the schools, and I've shared the information at the middle schools as well. So thank you for that. A special thank you to Mrs. Sugars and Mrs. Ridgway and the folks within their department as they have finalized the initial budget submission that is going in. It's an incredible budget. This budget process, and just to remind you of where we begin, literally begins at the end of September as the ladies and the folks in the department start putting information together, gets rolled out to the buildings. All of the building principals and their staff start to work on it in October and into November. There's discussions that occur in December and January and into February. This literally is almost a 10-month-long process that goes into building the budget. You get to see what that final piece is, in the discussions as take place in the B&F committee. But it's an incredible amount of work that goes into put these highlights out in terms of what goes through. We are an extremely large organization, right? We talk about it all the time. 12th largest district in the state. When you look at the amount of money that comes in and the amount of money that goes out, it's an incredible amount of work. So, Mrs. Sugars, Mrs. Ridgway, please, again, convey to your folks, our extreme gratitude on the work that you did. One of the highlights that Mrs. Sugars talked about, right, about 91% of our budget comes from Cherry Hill. We are woefully underfunded by the state. Again, as board members, you know that. Many of our community members know that as well. We sent the certified resolutions after the last board meeting, to all of our elected officials about encouraging them and urging them to address the underfunding aspect. When we listened to the governor's speech earlier in the month, we were optimistic as he talked about adding additional funds into public ed, and he did. Incredibly disappointed the way that he announced that those funds were going to be dispersed. I encourage you, all of you, to continue to be involved, and the folks in the community, if you have not been involved in Cherry Hill Fair Funding, they have a website. Look and see where that information is. We have heard through the legislators, as well as from the governor's office, that the impact of the phone calls and the information that goes through definitely has an impact. So continue to be involved in that. Again, Mrs. Judge and Mrs. Matlack, you all talked about, we'll go down on the 3rd, to the Senate hearing and provide testimony. We'll submit the testimony as well to the Assembly. There are a lot of folks I know from the community that are going as well. Just factually, last year when they held the hearings, it was a 5-minute limit by organizationally. When they did it, if you remember when we were down at Kingsway, when they had members of administrative teams from districts or board members from districts, they did limit that, to go through, and it's just a structural piece. Certainly we'll continue to express our displeasure with what it is, but continue to have the voices being heard. It does make a difference. I believe that it will continue to make a difference between now and when the budget is actually ratified and adopted by the state. Remember, it was from when the budget numbers were announced last March until the budget was actually adopted and approved in July that those additional funds came through. Our voice needs to continue to be heard. Later on this evening, when Mrs. Matlack moves the agenda for strategic planning, we talk about moving those items, that will go through for the referendum. An October 2nd referendum, 2018, there is work that must be done within our district. There's work that must be done within our district. As much as I would love the state to make good on the money that they should have given us over the last 10 years or the last 30 years or 40 years, I do not believe the state is ever going to turn around and make good on those monies. That does not mitigate the fact that there's work that must be done within our district. Again, I continue to be grateful for the community coming out and providing input. Mrs. Wilson, we're in the midst of, we have 29 community meetings that we have scheduled to come through. We've had a lot of folks that have participated. We take that information back in, so we want people to continue to be there. Tomorrow night, Mrs. Wilson, we have our next safety and security meeting. The community discussion will be at Rosa. Right, Rosa at 7 o'clock tomorrow night. We did have to cancel the one at Carusi last week. We will look to reschedule that. We're still trying to work out a date. It'll be after spring break, when we look to reschedule. I encourage you to come out to the meetings. I encourage you to come out to the meetings where we talk about the referendum. We talk about the work that's going to need to be done. Have the discussion, partake in what goes through. So that's all I have.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Malash. Good stuff as always. Move into our action agenda. Mrs. Seidel, would you please move the C&I agenda, please?
I sure will. Thank you, Dr. Dickinson. The superintendent recommends and I move the following. Number 1, approval of attendance at conferences and workshops for the 2017-2018 school year. Number 2, approval of out-of-district student placements for the 2017-2018 school year. Number 3, approval of elementary family life curriculum. Number 4, approval of summer 2018 programs. Number 5, approval of Meredith Keller research. Number 6, approval to refuse return 2017 Perkins funds. Number 7, approval to accept 2018 Title I Part A school improvement allocation for Cherry Hill High School West. And number 8, approval of out-of-district student placement services contract for the 2017-2018 school year. Do I have a second? Mrs. Scarpellino, any questions or comments? Dr. Wong?
I have a question about item 5. Is that consistent with other school teachers that looking for a master's degree? And also how much money that she's asking for?
So I will turn it over to Dr. Mahan. This was something that was discussed during our last curriculum instruction meeting and discussed during our work session. Yes, it is consistent with other requests from teachers, and she's not asking for any dollars. She's asking for approval to reach out to parents for approval to utilize some of our students in her research. Do I have that right, Dr. Mahan?
That's correct.
Does that answer your question, Dr. Wong? Yes. Okay, great. Anyone else? Mr. Goodwin.
Could you, I know you spoke about this in the work session, but could you review again why we were refusing the funds for the Perkins?
I'm going to let Dr. Mahan give that summary.
So we receive several, funding sources. One of them is Perkins, and the amount of administrative time designated to complete the Perkins grant is significant. That's one of the reasons. Another reason is that we went through consolidated monitoring a few years ago, and you may remember we had to come to you with several binders full of information, and there were a significant number of findings for the Perkins grant. We remedied all of those and made sure that they were all resolved and continue to move forward with our program because we believe that our program is robust, the courses that we offer through the Perkins funds. However, there have been some additional regulations that have come down from the DOE for Perkins across the state. And when we were trying to submit the application for this year, they changed some of the requirements. And in trying to adjust our grant, we have not been able to get that grant approved based on the programs that we offer. So one of the examples that I'll give you is that for CTE programs, career and technical education programs, they want only those courses to be offered for students who participate in a 3-course sequence. So we offer a very robust photography program. And in order for it to be considered eligible for Perkins funds, only students who plan to take all 3 courses that are offered in the sequence can take those classes. And we were not willing to say that we would limit the students who were eligible to participate in our courses based on the amount of funding that we were receiving. So that's why we have decided that we are no longer going to accept the funds. We're going to refuse the funds because we do believe that we can support the robust, very popular programs that we currently have for all of our students through our general fund. Okay.
Anyone else? Mrs. Scarpellino.
I just want to follow up, Dr. Mahan, so just to make sure it's clear that, so none of our programs that we currently offer are in any way going to be diminished or restricted because of refusing this money. In fact, they're going to stay the same because we are refusing this grant. Is that correct?
That is correct. You're welcome.
Anyone else? Seeing none, Mrs. Sugars.
Mrs. Seidel.
Yes to all.
Mr. Goodwin.
Yes.
Mrs. Judge.
Yes to all.
Mrs. Matlack.
Yes.
Mrs. Scarpellino.
Yes to all.
Mrs. Schultz.
Yes.
Mr. Tomlinson.
Yes to all.
Dr. Wong.
Yes.
Dr. Dickinson.
Yes to all. Mr. Goodwin, would you move the BNF agenda, please?
Yes, I will. The superintendent recommends, and I move the following: 1, financial reports; 2, resolutions; 3, resolution for the award of bids; 4, preliminary 2018-2019 budget; 5, maximum travel expenditure; 6, motion to approve use of capital reserve to fund approved projects for the 2018-2019 school year; 7, approval of the Cherry Hill DCP and P and McKinney Venti towed student out of district placements for the 2017-2018 school year. Resolution number 8, resolution for the award of transportation, and number 9, acceptance of donations. Forget about the okay, and there is an additional handout. I believe there's no additional items, but there's some further explanation on some of the items in the blue handout that you have. With that, do I have a second? Mrs. Schultz. Are there any questions? If not, Mrs. Sugars.
Mr. Goodwin,
Yes.
Mrs. Judge,
Yes to all.
Mrs. Matlack,
Yes.
Mrs. Seidel,
Yes.
Mrs. Scarpellino,
Yes.
Mrs. Schultz,
Yes.
Mr. Tomlinson,
Yes to all.
Dr. Wong,
Yes.
Dr. Dickinson.
Yes, to all. Mrs. Judge, would you move HR for us, please?
Yes, I will, Dr. Dickinson. The superintendent recommends, and I move the following. Number 1, termination of employment certificated. Number 2, termination of employment non-certificated. Number 3, appointment certificated. Number 4, appointments non-certificated. Number 5, leaves of absence certificated. Number 6, leaves of absence non-certificated. Number 7, other compensation certificated. And number 8, approval of revised job descriptions. Do I have a second? Mrs. Matlack. Any questions? Seeing none, Mrs. Sugars.
Mrs. Judge,
Yes to all.
Mr. Goodwin,
Yes.
Mrs. Matlack,
Yes.
Mrs. Seidel,
Yes.
Mrs. Scarpellino,
Yes to all.
Mrs. Schultz,
Yes.
Mr. Tomlinson,
Yes to all.
Dr. Wong,
Abstaining from item 3 involving Rowan University. Yes to the rest.
Dr. Dickinson.
Yes, to all. Mrs. Scarpellino, would you move P&L, please?
Certainly, Dr. Dickinson. The superintendent recommends, and I move the Oh, I turned it off. Sorry, I'll start again. The superintendent recommends, and I move the following. Number 1, first reading of policies. Number 2, waiver of Regulation 2340 field trips. Number 3, second reading of policies. Number 4, approval of harassment, intimidation, bullying, investigation decisions. Number 5, approval of harassment, intimidation, bullying, hearing decision. And number 6, resolution on gun violence. Do I have a second? Mrs. Seidel. Any questions? Seeing none, Mrs. Sugars.
Mrs. Scarpellino,
Yes to all.
Mr. Goodwin,
Yes.
Mrs. Judge,
Yes to all.
Mrs. Matlack,
Yes.
Mrs. Seidel,
Yes.
Mrs. Schultz,
Yes.
Mr. Tomlinson,
Yes to all.
Dr. Wong,
Yes.
Dr. Dickinson.
Yes, to all. And finally, Mrs. Matlack, you have some work to do this evening. Would you move strategic planning for us, please?
I do have some work. Thank you. The superintendent recommends, and I move the following. Number 1, resolution of the Board of Education of the Township of Cherry Hill in the County of Camden, New Jersey, authorizing certain actions in connection with the proposed schools facilities project. Do I have a second? Mrs. Judge. Please note that we have received the Exhibit A at your places tonight that's noted on the agenda. Are there any questions?
Yes.
Dr. Wong.
For this resolution that is for the board to vote on all the questions that are going to be on the referendum, or will be voted like separately?
So this resolution is to submit the project applications to the state. That's the first step in the process. Once the state reviews those project applications, they will come back to us and let us know what the preliminary eligible costs are and what they will support, what they will give us state aid for, all those kinds of things. So this is just the first step in the process.
But, you know, on the Exhibit A, it still has questions 1, 2, 3.
That's so you know where currently the projects are. That's just for your information, so you know that that project's currently in that question, or the second question, or the third question.
Any other questions? Mrs. Seidel.
I just want to make sure I understand. So a couple weeks ago, you showed us the very thick, long-range facilities plan that has to be submitted to the state for approval. And at that point, you said after that was submitted, which is the current state of affairs, this was the next step of the hopeful, wishful thinking piece, hopefully, that things that we'll look to do in the future. And that's this piece, correct?
Yes, so this piece goes in, and then we will do a corrected long-range, we will update our long-range facilities plan because they want to see these projects, even though we haven't done them yet.
Right.
As part of that long-range facilities
Okay,
plan.
thank you for clarifying that for me.
Mrs. Judge.
Did you just say that there's the potential that we might get state aid for some of these?
Well, you'll notice tonight when I did the budget presentation in the debt service fund that we did get state aid towards our debt service.
True.
So that is the state aid that we're talking about. So once they decide, you know, what is eligible and then what they'll fund, and then that gets prorated and prorated again, we certainly will never get,
right,
you know, 40%, but they will determine at some point how much each year when we go to make that bond payment, they will give us state aid towards that bond payment. So we approve the referendum, and then we structure our bonds, we sell our bonds, and then we have to pay back our principal and interest. And they will give us state aid towards the payment of the principal and interest.
Okay. Oh, fingers crossed.
Any other questions? Seeing none, Mrs. Sugars.
Mrs. Matlack?
Yes.
Mr. Goodwin?
Yes.
Mrs. Judge?
Yes.
Mrs. Seidel?
Yes.
Mrs. Scarpolino?
Yes.
Mrs. Schultz?
Yes.
Mr. Tomlinson?
Yes.
Dr. Wong?
Yes.
Dr. Dickinson?
Yes. All right, thank you, everybody. We'll now move into our second public discussion period. You may now comment on any issue. When you come to the mic, please state your name and address. You will have 3 minutes for your remarks.
My name's Rick Short, 1002 Chelton Parkway. I meant to say something nice in the beginning before. I give you guys good credit for your budgetary fixed cost, because when you look across the state, Cherry Hill has one of the lowest fixed costs, so I should have started out that way. But, you know, we can't travel in a time machine, can we? Jeez. So, you just voted and just approved $1 million, which I think is a flush down the toilet. So what are the... and another amazing thing is, and I'm new to bond and referendums, but I have absolutely no cost. So you guys just approved a $100 million budget with no costs, which is unbelievable. Okay, part two of the comments. So what should be our security goals for Cherry Hill? Well, we're at 50% police coverage. We all know that, right? The Sun reported that it was 100%, but it was really after the Philly.com article that Mayor Khan told how many police officers are in the schools. So it's kind of, a lot of people have different views on 50%. It would almost be like the Cherry Hill Fire Department coming up to your house and saying, oh, well, you know, we only brought 50% of our people, and we only have 50% water pressure, and your house is burning down, and your kids are trapped in the second floor. So that's my opinion to that. Protocols. Obviously, you brought in John Hunt, who is an expert, who I agree with, and we all know about the deadly 8-ball, and we all know about number 10, which I don't understand that during a lockdown, that if you're already hiding from the door, why wouldn't you be hiding from people outside? Because we know that the police would come through the hallway anyway. So that needs to be changed. And then, of course, let's go back to the good old physical security, which we don't have. We'll have it in 16 of our schools starting maybe in September, because we just did Payne and Woodcrest. And, of course, we know we have Barkley. So we have 3 schools. And, again, physical security, which means cameras. And I don't know, but if I did some rough ballpark here, maybe we're at $1 million. And I'm sure Mayor Khan would write a check at any minute for $1 million if we had to borrow it from the township. And then finally, I'll resend this is the 4th time I've mentioned breaches and security. I will resend it privately to you, and this is the 4th time on the record that I've mentioned that there are breaches, and that we basically have a Motel 6 school security, and my experts agree with me too. So.
Again, Miriam Stern, 121 Ashford Road. I'm actually here just to follow up regarding the Chinese proposed language offering for next year. And Dr. Mahan, I don't know if you can answer this question, but I understand that there's another candidate that's being interviewed in the process, and that's very exciting. But I think there's some concern about the length of the process, and maybe Dr. Malash, I don't know who can respond to this if it's possible. But I also want to say that in asking and talking to other folks involved in this, the Chinese language group, there's a concern that one of the contending candidates also has a competing opportunity that's been presented to that candidate. And I just think, I'm hoping the district is moving quickly, because there's probably not a lot of certificated Chinese language teachers available and interested in interviewing in our district for this position. And there's a lot of students who are really excited about this course offering. So I don't know if there's a way to respond. I don't know. I guess normally there isn't response during public comment, but.
I can tell you that we are finalizing the interview process. Again, our goal is to have the best possible candidate to start the program for us. And we've involved folks from one of the local Chinese schools, as well as been intimately involved in discussion, employees, former employees. So again, we want the best possible candidate, but that's really all I can say is the process is ongoing. Ideally, we'll have it done relatively soon.
Yeah, that's my hope and my request, is that it be done quickly so that we don't lose another potential candidate, because I know how that goes, and that's really hard to be on the other end of that, especially when you have a good one. Thank you.
Ann Einhorn, 1017 Edgemore Road. Thank you for the resolution on gun violence. It is beautifully written, particularly item number 2, which is close to my heart. So let's talk about a bond referendum and what it can mean to Cherry Hill if we don't pass it. I would suggest that most of you ride by Haddonfield High School right now and look at the reconstruction of a wall that almost fell in on the students a year ago. It's not just about vestibules with this bond. It's about other items. I have attended one of the bond presentations. Thank you for giving up a Sunday, Dr. Malash, to do that for the community. I understand the concerns about security. I am not a security expert. I do not know what things cost. I have been doing an impromptu survey for some time in my dental practices, one in general practice, one in pediatrics, to ask if parents and students and teachers and staff are safe. It's not reliable. I don't have the data to give you. I don't have numbers. So far, so good. We seem to be doing a somewhat great job. I'm also assuming that when you hear about security breaches that you're handling it because you have our kids as your responsibility. I don't know what else to say. I know people are upset. I know people are angry. I know people want what they want. I know what I want. Okay, it didn't happen yet. Okay. So I'm trusting in all of you and the community at large to work on this bond so that we can make our buildings safer. I was part of a very vibrant bond committee 20 years ago. We worked diligently. Nobody wanted more taxes, but we were able to do it. I do have a question, though, for Mrs. Sugars regarding the presentation to the state What's the response time to the proposals? Do we have one traditionally?
We're hoping to have a response by June.
Okay, so then we can do some more exact planning with those numbers. And it's always about the numbers when it comes to construction and getting things done. So thank you all. I know it's a lot. I know you face a lot. I thank the community that comes out to give their opinions, because we all should be a village. And I sure as heck hope we can be a village for a bond. Thank you.
Anybody else? No? Okay. Seeing none, thank you all for coming out. We appreciate having the audience, actually.
Audience.
Yeah. Please come out in 2 weeks. We'll be here again. Do I have a motion to adjourn? Mrs. Judge and Mrs. Seidel. Good night, everyone.